you can be from the Isle of Man, but the world is the horizon which you should be kind of, looking at.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
Manx-born Dr. Simon Collister is entrepreneurial spirited, an accomplished marketing and communications strategy consultant for high-profile global businesses and organizations such as Rolex, FedEx, BP, and many others. He's a trusted advisor, commercially minded, with expertise informed through long-term client engagements delivering high-impact work from energy to logistics, aviation to high-net-worth individuals, counter-extremism to humanitarian aid, including the UN Refugee Agency. Simon has published papers and edited collections on a range of topics, from brand, marketing and communications strategy, mainly focusing on digital transformation, and lectured at universities in the UK, Europe and the US. He also devotes his time to be an advisory board member at DigVentures, the world's first crowd-funded archaeology organisation. Simon is also a valued member of the Future Foundation, which is a think tank providing fresh ideas and a new impetus for public policy in the Isle of Man. Welcome to this week's Island Influencers. Welcome to Island Influencers, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I've spent a bit of time researching this before our conversation today, and frankly, amazed at some of the things that you've already done. But before we get to that, maybe we could turn the clock back, shall we? And for the benefit of our listeners, Simon, just tell me where you come from. We're recording this conversation at towards the end of Isle of Man lockdown, which Simon is going to be very jealous of.
Oh, but, yeah. I think you've got the end in sight, and we've just been told it's at least another 6 weeks before the schools may even go back.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
And I can't see that happening at the moment anyway. But that's the now. Going back to the then.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Ramsey boy. First and foremost, grew up in Ramsey, Alden Infants, Albert Road, Ramsey Grammar, the whole shebang. It was, I often talk back and tell the kids, we did this and we did that, and I think partly they're a little bit jealous that we got to do all of that, but also they then point out that we also didn't have computer consoles like they do and the internet. So I think they're slightly jealous, but I mean, it's, it was a wonderful time. And certainly when we are able to be over, the idea that they can just run up in the back lane behind my mum's house and just kind of go exploring up, the hairpin and up in the woods there. Yeah. It kind of, I mean, they love it. And it just kind of, I remember our middle son was just kind of like, but are you coming? And I was like, no, you just go and play in the back lane. And he was like, but is it okay if you don't come? I was like, yeah. I mean, maybe I should be saying this out loud, but I mean, he's 9, and our eldest is 12, and it was great. And then as our youngest got a little bit older, he's now 5. It's the same kind of, you come back.
Three boys that you have now, yeah.
Yeah. Ramsey, the Isle of Man, it would be a great place for them to go and explore and have fun. We do live out in the country here in the UK, so they can get out on bikes and scooters and walks and take their footballs out. But it was certainly, it was a different time, but it was certainly a great experience. With all that on your doorstep. Fond memories, yeah.
So who inspired you along the way then? What sort of mentors did you have to make you take the path that you did?
That's a good question, actually. I think, like everybody, I probably have kind of several mentors. There was certainly, going through Ramsey Grammar, certainly kind of teachers that encouraged you and kind of inspired you. I remember, and I'm not just saying it because they're my neighbours, but Susanna Starkey and Chris Starkey is kind of were certainly Susanna on the English side was a huge inspiration, just kind of giving you access to these stories and kind of a world of literature. And there was a great moment. I remember we were studying, and this is sixth form. I did A-level English. Mm-hmm. We were studying the English poet Tom Gunn. And she'd mentioned she had one of the collections of poems we had to kind of do for homework. So I popped around and borrowed this book off her, and I was reading it. And as I was reading the introduction, it talked about how this guy's poet, who ended up in San Francisco and kind of was quite a big name in the 60s, how he'd been to Cambridge, and he'd shared a room with a Manxman by the name of Seth Kane, and they'd got on very well, and he'd kind of been, you know, influential in his kind of early poems and career. And I thought, oh, what a fantastic story. And when I returned the book to Susanna, I said, oh, and did you know? Yeah, I'm sure you do, because it's your book, but the poet shared a room at Cambridge with this Manxman called Seth Kane. And as I did that, I handed back the book, and it was a hardback, and the dust jacket fell open. And as it fell open, written on the inside of the hardback cover was Seth Kane. And then I put two and two together, because, of course, Susanna's maiden name was Kane. Oh, yeah, that was my dad. So, nice. You know, it's a small little story, but you kind of, for me, I was like, you know, this idea that you're from the Isle of Man, it's small and it's a lovely community, and you're in the middle of the Irish Sea, but your horizons from the island are so vast, and we have so many opportunities. And it's, you know, and it's that sense that when I was growing up of like, I kind of used to tell people, they said, oh, it's a very small, very kind of like, you know, parochial. I'm like, well, it is in some ways, but at the same time, there's not many small places in the UK where you can walk down the high street and see Bank of Bermuda, Bank of Cayman Islands. Like on your doorstep, it's this very kind of, you know, it's a very small, you know, ancient community of people. But at the same time, is this kind of global vista. So once you've got this really strange situation, it's almost a microcosm of the 20th century. You've got kind of the local and the global.
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, that was a huge kind of inspiration in a way. And certainly I think kind of helped inspire that kind of the outward vision that I've certainly kind of had.
Sure.
But also the same kind of inward kind of like, you know, vision for the island as well, and recognizing our place in that whole kind of global world.
Yeah. So you did the whole Alden Infants, Albert Road School, Ramsey Grammar School. And from there, you, inspired by English, presumably, you went off to university and you did a number of degrees.
Couldn't get enough.
You're a perpetual student, one of those. So tell me about that a bit. Tell me a little bit about university.
I mean, it is funny, and it kind of, I think there were kind of threads that go through school and university and work. And I was just chatting to somebody the other week, the CEO of a big firm, and he was talking about my kind of career history, and he said it's quite sprawling. But and I was like, yeah, it is. And he said, but in a good way. He said, I can see that you've clearly followed a path that is kind of just allowed you to tap into the things that motivate you, that interest you, that you're passionate about. Yeah. And I think it was the same. I mean, at school, I mean, it's easy to kind of say, oh, I love school. And a lot of people do. And some people don't. I did enjoy it. And, you know, we had a great opportunity to do everything from music to sports to, you know, all the other subjects, and, you know, geography, and kind of going out with the countryside on your doorstep. So I've always been interested in kind of lots of different things. But the one thing that I think just really kind of resonated for me was books, really, and stories, and, you know, an understanding. I think literature, it allows you to kind of understand the world a bit better. And I was talking to an old university friend. We're talking about kind of sociology and science and understanding people's behaviors. And I kind of jokingly said, you know, actually, you know, you shouldn't study sociology. You should study literature, because that's where you get a real kind of rich understanding of kind of the way that people have behaved. And, you know, and I found that it inspired me. And I like to understand the way people act, you know, how they think, why they behave the way they do. And you kind of get that from literature in a really kind of rich and kind of an engaging way. So that was, for me, it was always going to be a case of, from school, it was going to be English to study as a first degree.
Yes.
But I've always had a kind of an interest in, you know, global affairs and politics. And I remember my dad saying he was surprised that I didn't do politics at A-level and politics at university. But that was always there. And even, you know, when you study literature at university, you can kind of take it down the kind of the political and the theoretical side of books. And that, so you kind of, I was able to balance that idea of, you know, the richness of the story and the understanding, you know, the conditions and the context in which it was written. Yeah. So you kind of get to blur those two boundaries. And then I mean, just to kind of talk about the education, I went and did a master's again in English, in modern literature, because I think that was certainly where I found a kind of a natural home. I liked the experimentation of the authors. I liked the fact that the world that they were writing about was fairly recognizable, even in the late 1990s, you know. Yeah. The things that the cities they were talking about, the events and the things that they were kind of discussing and describing were within, if not my living memory, certainly within kind of cultural and historical memory. So, you know, and they were also highly politicized in the, you know,
Yeah, of course.
Of the 20th century.
Yes.
And that was really interesting. And it was also things like, the formation of kind of new political and kind of social situations in the US. A lot of the kind of the early US literature that was coming out from then was kind of very formative. So I just found that kind of, it was again, this storytelling and a way to kind of understand people and the world around us, but through kind of, perhaps not necessarily scientific means, but by kind of artistic means. So that was great. Yeah, and then just to kind of cover off the studying, I then found I fell into a couple of years after. Well, I fell into working in communications and campaigning for some NGOs in my kind of early career.
Yeah,
and as part of that, I managed to get someone to pay for me to do. What I was doing, I thought was just kind of a knack, kind of like dealing with the media and politicians. And then I turned out there is an industry called public relations and lobbying that does that.
Yes.
And you could take a qualification in it. So I was kind of a bit of a sucker for learning. And I said, I'll do that qualification.
Yeah.
I realized the fact that was quite fun. And when I was doing my master's, I kind of thought I'm done with academia because I was kind of a bit, jaded about reading lots of books and writing about them and making.
So that came out, you finished that in 2002, but it was before you did your PhD in political communication. I mean, wow, what a subject! First of all, but 2010 you took a while to do that. I suppose
I did.
Took a while.
I did. So 2007, I kind of did the diploma, and it was in in public relations, which was it kind of showed me that you could actually apply scientific models to communication and getting people to understand and behave in ways that were kind of preferential for society.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I could do, if I was going to do more study, if I was going to do a PhD, which I'd always kind of thought about doing my master's, but then thought I couldn't do a PhD in literature, and then realized from doing this diploma in communications that, in fact, maybe I could do a PhD in political communications or something to do with communications. And at that point, I was fortunate enough to kind of get in on the whole digital and social media tsunami, I described it the other day, and it really was. It kind of almost came out of nowhere, and kind of just took over so many aspects of our lives, even in the kind of mid 2000s. So I was fortunate to have been kind of part of that wave, and going to university and saying I'd like to research, digital and political communications. It was just at the time of Obama's election and kind of how social media won that for him. Although actually it didn't. It was just a very, very effective use of email marketing that won it for Obama. But anyway,
yes.
And there was, it was a hot topic, and and I was able to kind of jump on board and start a PhD part time. So we just had our first child. I was working full time in a small business that was a startup but growing exponentially, and I started a PhD part time, which, looking back, I would do differently.
Yes, but you are where you are.
Well, quite. And so, and it took a good year to kind of work out how that was going to be feasible. And it ended up me actually kind of dropping my hours part time.
Right.
And so working part time for the startup, and then juggling some lecturing and some consulting around that and the PhD.
Yeah.
But it was part time.
What a wonderful wife. Oh, it's me to support you.
I know, and she brings me a coffee as well when I'm doing this interview.
Oh, yes.
So she's fantastic. We may come on to her a bit later, actually, but she was very understanding and very supportive. And 8 years later, or 9 years later, all in. But I finished. But I mean, it seems a long time, but actually, if you do rationalize it, a PhD full time is kind of 3 years and a year writing up. You can get funded for, and I wasn't funded, so that's why I was having to kind of work around it. It took me all in kind of 8.5 years, which if you kind of double, and it's meant to be part time, so it's literally half of the full time. So 3 to 4 becomes 6 to 8. So that's not a bad. That's within the kind of time constraints. Of
yes,
the whole.
No, absolutely. But
it was just a long slog.
Clearly, and the sort of experience and the brands that you've worked with, it just quite incredible. I mean, particularly looked at the publishing and lecturing that you've done, and one that because we watched the movie on it the other night was the one with Edward Snowden in, and so the lecture you did on boundary drawing power and the renewal of professional news organisations, the case of the Guardian and Edward Snowden's NSA leak.
There's a paper that my supervisor and I published at the time, and partly born out of some of his research. We then did some fresh research, wrote that paper, and then I used some of the unpublished research as a chapter in my PhD. But it is a fantastic case study in, and what my PhD was looking at really was about kind of getting too kind of convoluted and going down that kind of that wormhole. But it was around this idea that, so certainly in the mid to late 2000s, there was the sense that, the internet was a thing over here, newspapers and TV were a thing over here. And the internet was new and changing things, but they were all kind of seen as quite separate spheres. Yeah. And some work that my supervisor had done was kind of define this thing called the hybrid media environment. And he looked at the ways in which, as social media became more popular, it was influencing outcomes on television and radio. And the idea in reality, like everything, of course, was that there were no kind of real hard and fast boundaries between one thing and the other. So you would see kind of things happening on social media that would then influence something on television. Something in the newspapers would influence people on Twitter, which would then, bring about an extension or a change in a certain news story or kind of political decision. And that kind of chimed in with some of my my research, my diploma that we talked about, which looked at the ability for political blogs to set the news agenda. Mm-hmm. So, lots of work had been done on how news agendas are defined by journalists, by PRs, by, kind of marketing teams, the influence that goes into effectively defining what you read in the papers. No one had ever really looked at kind of the internet and bloggers. So I'd looked at how political bloggers were influencing the news. And that worked well with my supervisor because his work was looking at how there was a kind of continual flow of information between political bloggers and political journalists. People, just the public on Twitter, shaping the reception of answers on Question Time around the Question Time hashtag. So these kind of things were all colliding into kind of one, single hybrid environment. And that was kind of the thrust of my PhD, really. Yeah. That, and then introducing aspects of what we call materiality of communications. So a lot of research in communications looks at the language that gets used and the images that get used. So the kind of immaterial, if you like. And other research had looked at, say, the traditional economics of the media industry. If you could afford to own a newspaper, Murdoch style, you got to control what went into it. And my argument was looking at the fact that with social media, you've got technology, and that adds an unseen dimension. So things like algorithms are written and perform a material function in whether something is seen or not seen, or easily seen or not easily seen.
Yes.
And so you kind of get into this world whereby the traditional view of media power, which was journalists are influenced to write things by vested interests,
advertisers,
is a bit outdated. Well, advertising, or media ownership, or PRs who control access to information. I was saying there's a new set of tools that can control or enhance access to information, and that's things like algorithms. It's things like the platforms themselves and the economics of tech platforms like Facebook, and we're kind of seeing it a lot now in the news. Oh yeah, the power and control that kind of tech platforms have. Because they aren't media platforms, they're technology platforms.
Yeah, Google is getting a bit of a hit as well for all the financial scams they're allowing to pay them advertising revenue to rip people off.
Yeah,
it's quite current at the moment in my field. Anyway, it's like how dare they?
Do no evil. I mean, if you scratch the surface, it's again like so many things. A lot of this has been bubbling up for a long time. It's just only it just takes that kind of historical moments to shine the light on it, and all of a sudden it's like, hang on a minute.
But I suppose it's a crime, isn't it? At the end of the day, some of it. Well, it's really.
And digital ad fraud is a huge issue. And you look at kind of how, from the last thing I was reading, that a huge proportion of the US economy is built around Silicon Valley and the tech platforms there, and their revenues are predominantly based on advertising, selling advertising space. There's talk about the fact that kind of digital media and kind of tech platforms and digital ads are the next subprime bubble. I mean, I wouldn't like to comment too much on that, but I mean, it's certainly plausible. You can certainly see how it could be.
Yeah, you can.
So that's kind of a waffling overview, and I'm a fan of learning. Yeah, every day is a school day, right? And sometimes you have to formalize that in a qualification. But I'm done. I'm done.
No, I think you've gone as it's lifelong learning, anyhow, isn't it? Let's face it. But no, I mean, so your career path has led you to a number of global PR firms that you've worked for, Edelman, Weber Shandwick, We Are Social, and most recently you've been working as strategic director at BBL and Partners.
Yes.
Which,
I've actually just left BBL.
Oh, okay.
Partners. Yeah, so I can give you an update. It's not quite the exclusive, but
well, no, yeah, but whilst you were there, most recently you've been working with the likes of FedEx and Rolex and BP. Well, I mean, obviously everyone will think of BP most likely, Deepwater Horizon, but that's now 20 odd years ago.
Yeah.
Predates your time with BBL. So have you got any interesting stories to tell about your time at
I've got so many interesting stories. I'm not sure which ones I'm allowed to tell, but I was just going to say, it's sometimes funny when I'm kind of prepping a CV or kind of like updating LinkedIn. I do look at my kind of career, and it just feels a little bit. I'm like, who is this person? I genuinely still feel like the lad from Ramsey, and I kind of look at that, and it's classic imposter syndrome.
Well, you are. Yes. No, you are. You are still the lad from Ramsey, but
with some good experience. I think
with some great experience.
It's just really funny because I say to my kids, I just feel like I've always felt, they say, you don't understand what it's like to be 12, and I'm like, well, I do. In a different context, but. You do, I think it's classic imposter syndrome. You sometimes think, was I involved in that? Yes, I have been. And I've also been fortunate that, the likes of BBL and Partners is a small firm. And, I was consulting there initially. And then I went full time because they'd picked up a big contract. Here's the story. So my parents own a place in France, and we went out there one summer 5 years ago. The family took my mum out because it's nice in the summer. And
ski chalet, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, well, it's. It's just a chalet in a village, but it happens to be up in the Alps, so you can ski in the winter. And in the summer, it's like there's lakes on our doorstep, and you can swim and walk and ride. It is fantastic. But we were heading out there after we just had our youngest, and I thought, we haven't got a high chair. And a friend from university lived at the time in France, now lives in Switzerland, but right on the border. And it's, we're half an hour from the border. And I just dropped her a note on Facebook saying, don't suppose you've got a spare high chair? We're coming through, and it'd be nice to say hello. And she said, yeah, I've got a high chair because we don't need it anymore. Pop in, pick it up. So we popped in on the way from the airport, picked up the high chair, we had a little chat. And she said, you should talk to my brother. He's just set up and he's running his own business. I think he'd get on because he's into kind of digital and politics, etc. So when I came back from holiday, I dropped him a note, and he was like, "Oh, this is really handy because we've just got this piece of BP work on, and we could do with someone to work." It's how these things happen, right? And
yes, it is.
So I went in and worked on BP, and the BP work was their Keep Advancing platform. In fact, that wasn't the platform. I went in to work with a couple of other agency partners that they have on their global relaunch of their corporate narrative. And you mentioned Deepwater Horizon. It was kind of the biggest thing they'd done for 10 years, kind of putting their head above the parapet since Deepwater Horizon. Yeah. That was a phenomenal experience from, kind of being part of the creative development process, understanding their priorities as a company, as a brand, and then basically being able to take that and run with it. So leading on things like, who their audience were, because their audience very traditionally was kind of opinion leaders, and with the digital age that had evolved, and you had people who were maybe online opinion leaders, but not necessarily in the traditional sense.
Yes.
So rethinking who they should be talking to, helping them define how they could measure the impact and the effectiveness of their new narrative, helping them decide the media approach and which markets were priorities, what media channels we should be adopting, should we go digital?
Yeah.
Should we include traditional like television, which is still hugely powerful? And just kind of like doing what a good kind of strategist would do, which is kind of take the kind of, this is the situation, what's the solution, and working through all of those different aspects through to launch. And it launched, we started working with them end of 2016. It launched middle of September 2019. So, it doesn't happen overnight. These are kind of big, challenging projects that take time to evolve. Similarly with FedEx, kind of working with them on a transformation of their global marketing. Again, started in early 2017. That all went live end of 2019 with a huge global documentary series that we were able to sponsor on BBC Worldwide. So not visible in the UK, unfortunately.
Yeah. BBC,
but going around the world,
yeah,
a fantastic documentary, if I say so myself,
yeah.
called Made on Earth, where we kind of helped the BBC kind of shape the idea. They had full editorial control, but it was the history of global trade in 8 products, in 8 kind of objects or products, everything from kind of spices through to semiconductors, coffee, bicycles, how these things have kind of evolved through our history and then become part of the great global supply chain. And it was, and the BBC, obviously, but it's a cliche, but they did an amazing job in kind of just turning up these incredible stories around, so coffee, they focused on the story of coffee growing and the history of that in kind of South America. It's roasted in Italy and then it's shipped to China. And the kind of the hook for the episode was that for the first time in 2019 or 2018, coffee sales outstripped tea sales in China because of the urbanization, because of the consumerization of that society. And you see this whole kind of, the fascinating story played out throughout history. So again, kind of, you can understand why I was kind of so excited.
No, indeed. Yeah, but you've also worked, you've done some work with the UN refugee agency too. I mean,
that was when I was consulting. 2016, and that was a really kind of challenging but kind of inspirational year. That was the year really when the European migration crisis kind of hit on
started.
And was working with them on the digital side to kind of map out who their stakeholders were. Looking at the networks of online individuals who could be mobilized to raise awareness of the issue, to help fundraise for the issue, to kind of to put pressure on governments potentially, although not directly because they are funded by governments, but put pressure on society to make people aware of the huge challenge. I worked on a number of projects with those guys, and that was great. It meant a couple of trips to Geneva as well, which is kind of always good. And it's hugely kind of inspiring to kind of. But I think there's a risk that it becomes your day-to-day job, and you kind of overlook the fact that you're kind of stood in UNHCR headquarters overlooking Lake Geneva, and you're thinking, oh right, okay, well I'll just get on and do the stuff that they want me to do. But I think I think sometimes my wife kind of points out, she's like, just tell me that bit again, and I kind of say something I've just said. She's like, just think about what that actually is, or what that actually means. Like, trying to think something, along the lines of like, well, I was in the headquarters of the UNHCR in Geneva. There was one time I kind of, I was invited to do a talk at a NATO event in Estonia, and we'd been to my wife's sisters with all the kids.
Not bad for a boy from Ramsey, really. but just what you said there.
we all went over to my sister-in-law's house, and there was a couple of the family members there. And the next day they were going to see Bibi's land. And I said, "Oh, I need to jump back on the train." And someone said, "Oh, you're not coming to see Bibi's land?" My wife's like, "No, he's going to Estonia to give a talk to NATO." That kind of like that. And it is kind of like that real disjunction between kind of like, how I see my everyday life, popping to the supermarket, going out for bike rides with the kids, but then doing the other stuff, the professional stuff, which is kind of, it's a funny old world, isn't it?
Yeah, we're all human. The interconnectedness of things.
Well, exactly. We're all human.
Yeah, well, that's really great. Thank you. Just to bring us completely up to date then, now that you've moved on from BBL and Partners, what you're doing now?
Well, I mean, I guess more of the same. So still looking to kind of, work with global brands on kind of solving complex problems through insight, creativity, and communication. If I kind of use my own kind of manifesto, but working for myself ultimately. And the guys at BBL and Partners are great, and I still have a good relationship, and we may well work together going forward. But it just kind of, with the way everything's been over the past year and the kind of the craziness of it all, I think I felt like I wanted to take back a bit more control over my own work, my own kind of destiny, but also to help out. I mean, my wife's a teacher, and she hadn't taught for a number of years after we'd had our second child. But then at the start of last year, we were just talking about, whether she would want to go back to work and what she might do. And she had worked, just not teaching.
Yeah.
And again, as these things happen, the very next day, she had a message from another stepsister saying, "I don't suppose you know anyone who'd be interested in drama teaching maternity cover at my school." And it's a decent school, and it's near to where we live. And she replied saying, well, maybe me, but I'm not sure, because she's a drama teacher. And then the next day she's like, I've replied to this and I'm not sure how you feel. And then literally, again, one of those things, out of the blue, the opportunity to go back to teaching, which actually worked. And it was part-time, it was job share. So it ticked a lot of boxes. It was a great school, it was nearby, it was a good department, and it was flexible. And it seemed to pay off, actually. And she got the contract or got the job. And then COVID happened. So she went back to teaching in kind of June time in the most bizarre circumstances. So, not being in school, teaching kind of through Teams, never having met the class in person. And that's the same now. I'd always knew that I was going to have to kind of flex my working situation, and BBL and partners I would say they like an office and they see the value of people being in an office. And I kind of felt that wasn't going to work for me, because certainly with homeschooling kids and my wife teaching and me trying to do work, it's almost a step too far, really. So I kind of decided to return, and I'd been doing it previously, to return to kind of my own business. But I think going forward, it's exciting. I've got a couple of clients on board. It's interesting work. And the plan is really to try and build that. I've got a few more bits and pieces in the pipeline, lots more ideas.
Right.
And I know we're in a difficult situation, but, stuff's still happening. So I'm going to get out there and kind of just try and build a business.
No, fantastic, Simon. Well, we'll certainly be putting your contact details in our show notes.
Fantastic.
So if anybody's looking for your sorts of specialisms, I mean, goodness me, it's...
I'm versatile.
Yeah, you certainly are. Well, okay, if you don't mind, let's move on to the questions I ask all my guests on Island Influences. Primarily, if you don't mind me asking, I mean, I ask this of people in my role as a financial planner, but what's your earliest memory of money? I mean, how was money growing up for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And that conversation actually came up the other day with a coach who, so I do some business coaching. I receive business coaching, and we were talking about kind of inspiration and kind of childhood memories. And we spoke about this a little bit. I mean, my earliest memory of money, I would say kind of two distinct things. One is about misordering some sweets in the sweet shop and kind of being quite scared that I didn't have enough. And it was fine because my dad was outside and I could just kind of top up 50 pence or whatever it was. But then the second one, the kind of the other memory is going with my dad to open a bank account. And he was very kind of, he was a financial, planner and an IFA.
Yes.
And so he, so money for him was all, again, it was very kind of professional. It was very important. And I think that kind of instilled in me a sense that money was important and money was a thing, and money was an enabler and something you should kind of think about and value. Saying that, I also, on the flip side, when I think about my own kind of experiences with money, in my kind of, childhood, it's despite it being such a prevalent part of my family life, I don't recall engaging with it that much. I remember, certainly kind of going to university, my dad kind of instilling the importance of kind of pensions and all the rest of it. And I think I was just a little bit too kind of caught up in the excitement of things. But certainly in family and childhood, it was, I think we benefited in two ways. One was that both my parents came from, working class families, and knew the value of having money, having not had money, or not substantial amounts of money. So there was a sense that kind of money was an enabler. Money would help you to take more control of your life. And it was also a very kind of, Christian household in the sense that the love of money, greed was not good, but money was important, and it was not a taboo topic.
Very important distinction to make, actually.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And the second thing is that both, my parents moved off the island, and then moved back to the island in 1979, and again, just as the island was taking off as a financial centre. So I think we were, I don't know the details, but I certainly guess that we benefited from the general rise in kind of, wages and living standards and everything that the financial sector brought to the island in that period, which is a tricky one, because also at the same time, that whole period brought downsides to the island, in terms of kind of community, culture and society, without kind of getting too kind of political. And but I absolutely saw the benefits of it. I could also see
me too.
the detrimental aspects. But you couldn't deny that had helped me, had given myself and my sister opportunities that my parents certainly didn't have. I was the first person in my family to go to university, which is funny because when I went to university and met people of my generation, they certainly mostly weren't the first person to go to university.
Yeah, sure.
So it was a tricky one. It was important, and it was an important part of kind of your daily life, but it didn't kind of, certainly for me, it didn't prefigure any decisions or any kind of judgments that I made in life. It was there. It was important. You need to take it seriously, but at the same time, I didn't let it kind of rule or control me. And I do remember my mum talking to me about A-levels and saying, "You're not doing enough study, and how about if you get straight A's, we'll buy you X or Y." And I just remember thinking, I was like, nah. I was like, I'll do the work that I want to do, and I'll get the results, and hopefully they'll be decent. And if they're not, but I just felt like I couldn't be bribed, and that wasn't any kind of explicit statement. That was just because kind of like, nah, I money's important, but I don't think you can use it in that way.
That's very interesting.
You absolutely can, but personally, it just didn't seem that worked for me.
Yeah, well, for the benefit of listeners who live in Ramsey, I'm sure many of them would remember your dad, Alwyn Collister, who was the man from the Peru for many years, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
He became an IFA, and of course your mum, Anne Collister, great education. Cool. Yeah, and she's as large as life, and a lovely woman. So. Yeah,
definitely larger than life, and both of them kind of growing up, were huge inspirations in many ways. And I talked earlier about kind of growing up and seeing the island as part of an international kind of global world, rather than just the island or just the British Isles or whatever. And my dad was, that wasn't just the context. My dad was definitely instrumental in that. My mum always joked that he wouldn't have returned to the island. She made him return to the island to raise a family. He was, he talked about seeing the world, and kind of I remember he was telling stories how he got a boat to Sweden when he was 16 and hitchhiked down Sweden back to the island, back to Laxey, and I mean, those kind of stories are kind of crazy. And he certainly kind of helped instill that kind of internationalism that I think is still there. But he was fiercely proud and loved the island as well. So you can absolutely balance those two qualities. Yeah. And going through life, kind of seeing and kind of coming across Manxmen and Manx women that have kind of absolutely done that, from the influence on the suffragette movement to here's a good story that is maybe a little bit off topic, but when I was again kind of studying English at sixth form, I noticed that some of our Arden Shakespeare collection, the definitive works of Shakespeare books, some of them were edited by a guy called Frank Kermode, and I thought, that's a Manx name. And I looked at the bio, and he was from Cambridge and a very kind of established and highly fated English literature scholar. And then I noticed that my dad came home once with a biography. We bought a biography of his for my nana, and I read it, and I thought, he's not just of Manx descent. Like, he literally kind of comes from Douglas. And then going to university and kind of seeing more of his name popping up on stuff. I mean, again, making opportunities for yourself. I kind of one day, a friend of mine was going for an interview at Cambridge. I went to York. We were in York, and he was going for a master's interview at Cambridge. And I said, tell you what, this guy from the Isle of Man, who's some kind of like now aged professor, is in Cambridge. I'll come with you. And I back in the day before emails, I wrote him a letter. I remember just writing him a letter at King's College or whatever. And then within 2 weeks, got a reply saying, that would be lovely if you're in on this day. Come and see me in my flat. Here's the address.
Fantastic.
So a friend and I went down, and I spent all day in his flat in Cambridge. He must have been in his late 70s by then. And we just chatted about the Isle of Man and literature. And he'd supervised one of my tutors in York a long time ago for something. And at the end of it, he kind of he said, I need to ask you to leave. He said, I've got to get ready. I'm going to London tonight. I'm doing a radio show with my friend. You might have heard of him, Melvin Bragg.
Blimey.
And it's just like, oh yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, and he was doing In Our Time on Radio 4. And then he offloaded me with loads of books from his library, like books that were like inscribed to Frank, lots of love, Auntie Leslie or whatever or something. And I was like, what a phenomenal experience, and he signed my copy of his latest Shakespeare.
That's a great story.
So but anyway, all part of the fact that you can be from the Isle of Man, but the world is the horizon which you should be kind of, looking at.
Totally. Very inspirational. Thank you. So of all the things you've done throughout your life so far, what things have given you the most fulfillment from a personal, but also from a business perspective?
Good question. I was thinking about this, and it's tricky because, the obvious thing and the right thing to say is obviously, meeting my wife, Sarah, who kind of is I have described her, and I do describe her as the kind of my rock, which is a bit of a cliche perhaps, but it's genuinely true because she kind of tethers me. Otherwise I'd be off kind of doing a second PhD and kind of, doing all other kinds of weird and wonderful things. And she kind of grounds me and kind of, keeps me in check and also supports me when I do go off on those whims. Obviously having children, phenomenal experience and kind of, makes you hugely proud about the things that they are doing and seeing them grow and develop. Those are the kind of the core things. But I guess other things in personal, what's kind of given me satisfaction. Completing the PhD is kind of painful and difficult as that was at times. I am hugely kind of proud that, I've managed to get that under my belt because, on a number of occasions, absolutely, there was a time where you're thinking, should I just knock this on the head? Is it really worth it? And then you kind of persevere and get through. And then an earlier memory, I was just thinking about other things, is actually when I was younger and, about 16, 17, I decided one summer, I think it was after GCSEs, show, and I was kind of well involved in the kind of the Manx music scene and Manx. Yeah,
you're a really great guitar player. Phenomenal.
Thanks very much. It was, but the one thing that kind of eluded me was the language, and I loved it. And I generally do love languages and kind of, whether it's kind of singing in other languages or hearing people speak in other languages. And I thought, but Manx, I need to, how do I crack that? And it literally came down to, I borrowed a copy of Aviation, which was the Manx Radio 3 cassettes.
Yes.
A slightly dog-eared booklet. And over the course of one summer, literally, and this was a big eye-opener for me at the time, basically kind of taught myself basic Manx. And then that was the summer. And then kind of come the autumn, I started going to Tyne and Gilga. And kind of doing the evening classes out there with John Crellin and Leslie Quirk and Jennifer Cooley-Glasgow as well at the time.
Right.
And found myself within a kind of a year had got kind of fairly proficient. And I think I got it as far as getting my silver fania. Or fania, the ring. So kind of denotes a level of fluency. And then I kind of went to university and it kind of petered away a little bit. But certainly after having kids and kind of, reminding myself that actually was still fairly fluent in Manx was a good kind of reawakening. But certainly at the time, what it taught me, I was just kind of blown away by the fact that one minute I couldn't speak Manx. The next minute, through just doing like 20 minutes a day, really applying it and then speaking it where I could with other people and, trying to find opportunities to use it and writing letters in it. All of a sudden you could speak another language. And it was this kind of weird sensation of like, well, I didn't think that was possible, but actually it's happened. And anything is possible. Well, within reason, if you set your mind to it, And so that was a big kind of, and I am proud of that. And I've tried to do it since with other languages. French, I got pretty good at French a couple of years ago. But again, if you don't use it,
you lose it.
You lose it. So
sure.
That was when I had more time on my hands. And I was able to use it by going on holiday to France, which happened for a while. So those things are kind of, those personal achievements, beyond, family, are big for me, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. But career-wise, what's
career-wise? I think again, it's those kind of, I guess, transformational leaps. So I started out doing kind of, I'd done some work experience in a charity after leaving university. Really enjoyed it. Met my wife. I didn't really have any clue what I was going to do for a career after university. Because when you say you study English, people say, "Oh, you're qualified to do anything," and then I always go, "Yeah, but also qualified to do nothing." is the flip. And I saw a job for an NGO that was a road safety charity called Break. It's still going, and it was in Yorkshire, which is where I just finished university. It's where my girlfriend at the time lived. So it kind of made sense to try and get a job there. I'd gone to Holland for what should have been a kind of 6 to 8 month stay to teach English over there with the British Council. But I just literally 2 weeks before I left, I met my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And the first couple of weeks kind of spent, I got my first ever mobile phone bill came through. It was about £450. So there was a kind of indication there that I probably should knock that on the head and make an executive decision, because it wasn't going to work out, and I was going to have to go back and kind of stable up. And so, and this job came up anyway. I got a job working in comms and PR, and then did that for a few years, and then joined a couple of small local businesses, found social media, and then one day, again, another funny way of these things working. One Saturday I was at home, and I had a strange urge to check my emails, and I thought, I don't usually check emails on a weekend. So I went and checked my emails, and there was nothing in there apart from a bit of spam. And I was like, oh, well, why did I had a really strange sensation to check my emails? Funny, never mind. And I almost logged out, and I thought, oh, I'll just check my spam folder. And I checked my spam folder, and there was an email from the managing director at Edelman saying, oh, I know you've conversed with our CEO through your blog and social media. He's asked me to get in touch to see if you'd be interested in working with us. And it was that, again, a very strange moment of like, wow, yeah. I almost missed this email that transformed my career. Yeah. So, I mean, that professionally, that was a kind of a transformational moment, because it kind of moved me out of kind of, regional business into kind of international business, and put me on that kind of career trajectory, really, of moving up into kind of bigger agencies. So that was great. And then more recently, the work at Black Book on the BBC. I mean, I guess it's recent, but the BBC documentary series was a phenomenal project to be involved in. So that was kind of some
very fulfilling. Yeah. Great. Well, so for any existing or aspiring business owner or entrepreneur, what would be your number one business tip, Simon?
There's so many, and there are kind of so many, specific things. So I'm going to try and keep it quite broad, and I've kind of just thinking about it this morning, and I'm new to the business, but having seen We Are Social kind of grow from startup to, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately for me, about 18 months after I decided to leave, they sold for about 30 million, I think. And I was employee number 9, so I was in line for a decent windfall.
Yeah, you were.
But the kind of the context and the situation at the time, just it made sense to step away from it all. But certainly from seeing small to big and seeing how big businesses work, I think for me one key thing is momentum, is to absolutely kind of. And I'm terrible at this. I need to remind myself to do this. It's kind of like you have a good call or a good meeting, and then it's like, oh, well, I'll just kind of leave that for a few days and then follow up. And it's like, you need to just keep them when, it's a cliche, strike while the iron's hot. But maintain that momentum, that kind of, it's a bit like riding a bike, I guess. If you kind of slow down, things start to wobble. So you just keep that momentum and kind of keep moving forward, make those calls, take those opportunities, because you never know where they're going to lead to.
Yeah.
And then thinking about, just generally speaking, businesses that work well, and again, maybe a bit obvious, but they have a really good culture. They have a really strong culture. And I think certainly over lockdown, where I've seen the importance of culture, I mean, having a good, strong culture is really important for the viability and sustainability and growth of any business. But certainly in the pandemic, what I've noticed is that businesses that don't have a strong culture can kind of get by having people in close proximity, because there's then like an enforced
sort of more survival type emotions as opposed to an attention.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Yeah. And you are with each other. So there is a bit of kind of, day-to-day kind of banter. But when then you kind of dissolve that physical presence and there's no culture there, and there's no desire to maintain that stickiness in the business. And then it starts to kind of like, fall apart, as it were. So maintaining momentum, maintaining a strong culture, I think, for me.
That's brilliant. Great, thank you. So what do you do to relax, Simon, these days? What do you do to keep your life in balance?
It's funny.
Go for bike rides with the kids. Or just bike rides. It's funny because I was thinking, without wishing to prejudge, you probably thought, oh, it's music related. And it is. I mean, we moved house a couple of years ago, got our own kind of like snug with a new record player, and kind of like started buying records again. So listening to music and kind of, it's fantastic. Playing music, but there's not too many opportunities to play. What sort of music?
Man, it's a cliche, but like everything. I mean,
eclectic,
our two eldest boys are cathedral choristers. We're very fortunate to have these cathedral choristers. That they would say they're not. It's not fortunate, but they are. It's great to hear kind of English 16th century motets or Italian like 16th century so. I mean, that is fantastic to listen to. Maybe not first choice, but everything from kind of the obvious stuff like classic rock. My middle son's really got into AC/DC, so we've got some old kind of classic heavy metal and rock going on, all kind of more modern stuff. And I like experimental or modern music, but also a lot of, without goes without saying, a lot of traditional stuff.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of, and there's some great kind of bands coming out of Scotland at the moment that I was kind of
there aren't
discovering.
Have you heard of MacLear? Did you see any of the
I know a couple of the guys in MacLear, and they're
I'm sure you do.
stuff, well, I say coming out of Scotland, I mean coming out of the Isle of Man as well.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. And there is that bit of crossover too. So I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, there's some great bands coming out of the Isle of Man at the moment. Marul and MacLear, and also kind of listen to kind of that wider kind of Celtic diaspora and Scottish stuff. But I also like there's a great Basque band that played at Celtic Connections last year that I'm really into at the moment, and I still love. My family hate it, but I still love playing on Breton bagads.
Oh, bagads, yes, I know it is an acquired taste, isn't it?
Get this off, and I'm like, no, it's really good.
Yeah, it's
like a really good bombard solo coming up.
Yeah, yes.
But all of that stuff, it's just music in general. But that's kind of good for relaxation. But I also, and I would be surprised to hear myself saying this in my younger self, but exercise. I enjoy running these days. I used to do it at school, and you're
still young yet. Wait till your knees go.
I enjoy it, yeah. And at the moment with swimming, I'm managing to get out and swim in the River Nene every week with a friend. So that's giving me perspective.
Great.
That kind of stuff.
So normally I'd ask guests, because you don't live in the Isle of Man, but what are the best things about living in the Isle of Man? But you lived in the Isle of Man, and you don't anymore. So I don't know. Have you got a view?
What's the best thing about living in the Isle of Man is it's the Isle of Man. I mean, like what else do you want to know? I mean,
well, there you go.
It's everything, isn't it? It's the landscape, it's the sounds, and it's the smells, and it sounds might sound a little bit strange, but it's when you're there, it's that sense that you're kind of you are kind of part of a historical flow and trajectory that is unique to the island. You feel
that you belong when you go back?
Yeah. Yes, I do. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that things have moved on without me being part of it or aware of it.
Well, that actually moves on very well to, what would you say, are the main challenges that the Isle of Man faces? Well,
I mean, there's all the usual ones. I mean, structural challenges like the demographics, aging population, pensions.
Well, that's just developed world in general.
Well, yes, true. But it's still a challenge for the island. Which, when combined with the kind of the headwinds globally of offshore finance, or the offshore finance model, I think presents some structural challenges. But I think, again, drawing on my own kind of experience, what I think is an opportunity, if not a challenge, is having a clear vision. Like, if you said to me, where will the Isle of Man be in 10 years' time? I couldn't give you that answer. There's a lot of, we're living in a very turbulent period, goes without saying, with Brexit, Scottish independence.
That was before COVID. Yes.
And COVID, not to mention COVID. There was an article in the Sunday Times last week looking at, the likelihood of Scottish independence, looking at majority in favour of exploring a referendum on the unification of Ireland. The Isle of Man is at the heart of all of those issues and the global economy and the global economic challenges. Where do we want to be in 10 years' time? Because just from my own experience of working with kind of, global businesses, having a strong vision is half the battle in getting to that future desired state. So I think I would like to see kind of a much more, future looking or forward looking vision for the island, I think. And I get it's difficult in the current situation when you're dealing with the day to day, but I think there needs to be recognizing that you can manage the day to day, and if you have a clear vision, that will actually make managing the day to day easier, because it will tell you where you need to get to. And so I think part of the solution to that is going to be having somebody, if government is kind of busy dealing with the realities of COVID and borders and vaccination programs, there's an opportunity for somebody to take a look and kind of map out that horizon, whether that's kind of, done within government through kind of business or I'm involved with the Future Foundation, which is a think tank effectively looking at some of the challenges that the island is facing and looking at solutions to overcome those. And again, it chimes with my own kind of personal beliefs and kind of experience of taking a look internationally, looking at what other jurisdictions around the world are doing. And I think, growing up, it used to frustrate me that the horizon of, in the 90s of some politicians and certainly kind of some, friends and kind of colleagues was very much the northwest of England, or it was the British Isles, or it was maybe other crown dependencies, right? And actually, the world has fragmented. It's a much more diverse place, and we should be looking to other areas, within Europe, or within. I always used to think it's funny that people used to want to go to Liverpool for the day, and I used to say, like, you've got the European capital city in Dublin, like just as close. Like, why go to Liverpool? You could literally go to Europe, in an hour and a half or a couple of hours on the CCAT. So I think looking more broadly at the opportunities that are out there, what other people are doing, and Scotland is a really interesting model. Notwithstanding their kind of need to build a solid business case for an independent Scotland, but they are doing a lot of work in looking at similar size or kind of similar positions geographically, jurisdictions, and what would work for them. And I think it would be great for us to do something similar with the Future Foundation, to look at
it does sound great.
What are the opportunities for sustainable growth for the island, taking away all of the kind of pre-existing or legacy, commitments or realities, and saying, if we're looking at this with a blank canvas, what are the opportunities? What's the vision? How do we get there?
So what have you got planned next, without leading the witness, Your Honour?
Well, grow the business, try and maintain a work-life balance. I did joke, and my wife jokingly said yesterday, she said, I thought the whole point of you kind of working for yourself again was that you could get a better work-life balance. And she said, I've seen you less since you started working for yourself. Because I'm just going to go and follow up this email. You
fell for that old chestnut, did you?
Yeah. So continue to build a business, continue to spend time with the family, or spend more time with the family, without hopefully having to be in London as much. And I guess, as a sidebar project, really, for me, I would love to focus on starting to build that vision, really, kind of, at least in a kind of third-party objective capacity. What could the Isle of Man achieve? Where could it go? How does it get there?
Yeah.
That's, it's a sidebar, but I think it's a real personal, project.
Do you see yourself ultimately, since you can work from anywhere these days, and you both have proved it, school on Teams, hopefully not forever, but also your consultancy work, it's all online. Everybody's working from home that can. Do you ever see an opportunity to return? Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, we spoke about, actually, because we haven't seen my mum. We saw her for 2 weeks in the summer. She came over to us. Yeah, we haven't seen my mum for over a year. And I was saying that, who knows where this is going to end. I know a lot of people at kind of Christmas were like, hurrah, 2021's here. And I was a little bit more pessimistic, dare I say. I was like, not a lot is going to change, certainly in the first half. So we did talk about maybe kind of getting over in some of the school holidays for a prolonged period, and seeing how that goes. So never say never. I mean, just having, being able to be and work in the island would be fantastic. And with clients being international as well, and to say nothing of the income tax rates being far more attractive. Let's just get that. Definitely. Corporation tax. Yes. So never say never. Yeah. Okay. Let's hope that we see making good on that. So are there any books that you've read recently that you'd recommend to listeners? Loads. Yeah. All right. Well, pick one. Pick one. Can I pick two? Can I pick two? So one is a book. Again, I was in a bookshop in London looking for something else, and I couldn't find what I wanted, and my eyes just kind of stumbled on this book on a new release shelf, and it looked great, and I bought it, and it was transformational for last year. It's called On Grand Strategy, by an American academic called John Lewis Gaddis. But he takes this kind of meandering walk from the Persians and the Greeks through to the Cold War, looking at how nations and leaders, great leaders, have deployed strategy in the kind of in the grandest sense, and it's beautiful, because we're not talking about media or business strategy, although the kind of the principles remain the same, but it's ultimately about how do you balance means with ends in achieving your goals, but it kind of roots it in these great historical contexts, which kind of reinforces this idea that in reality human history doesn't deviate hugely. Mm-hmm. There's a great quote. Well, maybe this gets. I've got loads of great quotes, but one of them is, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme." Yeah, Mark Twain. Was it Mark Twain? Right. Mm. So and you see this coming through. So what worked and what didn't work for the Greeks and the Persians didn't work for Prince Philip of Spain or Queen Elizabeth. So that's great. It kind of roots everything you're doing in this kind of grand historical narrative. Mm. And then the other book was really good. It's called actually I've got it here. What's it called? It's called The Levelling. I can never remember the exact title, by an Irish economist called Michael O'Sullivan, and that's kind of looks at
his take on the world post-globalization, and he says we can be in no doubt that globalization is faltering, and he makes a really solid argument as to why that is the case and what are the main causes. But he kind of says that the benefits of a global economy and a global world shouldn't be thrown out with the bathwater, effectively. And then kind of goes through some of the realities that need to happen. So he talks about the need for a global conference on debt,
Did you hear Mark Carney's Reith lectures?
A couple of them, yes. And I think they're very much on the same page.
Marianne Mazzucato, she's another one.
This week,
the value of everything
and mission economy, and it's all of this stuff. But he also interjects the idea that the reality is the world is going to become multipolar. Well, it is becoming multipolar, and he talks about the rise of kind of blocks. So rather than it being a single globalized world determined and influenced by the US, you're going to have kind of geopolitical blocks and important questions. Will that downplay the importance of the US? Where does Britain fit within that? Because it's not within the European bloc.
No.
But at the same time, is it within the US bloc? And there's some strong arguments as to why the US and the UK, whilst they have a special relationship, it's not necessarily deep and kind of immovable. And it'll be interesting with Biden.
Totally.
See where that goes. So anyway, he maps out the kind of he maps out the future and the direction in which the world could be going, and also should be going from an economic perspective.
No,
so
brilliant.
That's fascinating.
Okay, that sounds great. You should maybe send links to that so we can put those in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely. And then I would also say 2 great books I read in the last year as well. Middlemarch, George Eliot. If you want to understand social relations and human behavior.
Right.
And Graham Greene's The Quiet American, and how ultimately we really don't know people, is what his argument is, and how people behave in the same way as nations, or nations behave in the same way as people. We can't extract kind of national behavior from the behavior of people.
No.
Great.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating. Yeah, links to those books would be great. Thank you. What's your favourite quote? You've said a few already, actually.
Well, I mean, I'm like walking quote.
They change, though, don't they? Quotes.
They do. Well, in fact, there's loads. But one that I saw recently in my little kind of jotter, which really resonated, and I think it's a really important one for start of the year, for starting your own business, for achieving anything in your personal life. And I think it's Henry Ford, and it was just, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, great quote. Just to finally wrap up, where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing through your business and other things?
I would send them to my website, which is www.simoncollister.com.
Okay, we will put a
link still a bit of a work in progress, but you get a sense and flavour of some of the stuff.
Yes, all websites are a work in progress. I wouldn't worry about that. Great, that's fine. And of course, we'll put links to your social media. Are you just on LinkedIn, or are you on anything else?
Twitter.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook. I tend to be a browser on Facebook rather than a producer.
Right.
I'm also on Instagram, but that's not been updated.
Have you figured out how it works yet? Because I haven't. Thank you so much for your help in this project, Simon. Thank you. It's been a real joy to interview today. So thanks so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks for your time, Sharon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.